Narrative shift is about challenging our collective understanding around issues and ideas, challenging our assumptions, whether it be about race, immigration, gender, schools, prisons, or many other issues. And what better way for us to deconstruct these narratives than with a story like Hold Your Fire that raises so many questions for us to think about and converse about. And, as I think about this conversation and this idea of a community dialogue, we can't fear conversations, right? Because there's a narrative of fear, right? And this narrative of fear is a big one. It's powerful because it kind of moves us to not see each other and not see our humanity, which is something that Hold Your Fire, the film, profoundly challenges, right? My friend, my colleague, someone who's really, inspired me in my filmmaking journey. I say he's a good dude, not because he's a good filmmaker, but he's actually a good person. And, when I thought about like, how do we talk about narratives? How do we talk about hard things? I felt like Stefan Forbes would be the perfect person to begin this series with. So I wanted to bring into the fishbowl my friend, Mr. Stefan Forbes. One of the things that, in the film world, there's been a lot of discussion about is responsibility as a storyteller, right? Who should make stories about particular communities? So I really wanted to know, what made you want to make this film? What was it about your identity? I'm making assumptions being white male, that made you feel like it would be, you would be able to tell, a story with such diverse perspectives.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually for white filmmakers, but also for many other cultures. It's something we've been learning to ask, right? Is this story something I should even be telling? A lot of well-meaning white people jumped into Ferguson films, and George Floyd movies. And it's like, no, we have to step back and go through some questions here. Is this, am I thread jacking? Am I kind of getting into someone else's cultural, intellectual property? Does the world need my take on Harriet Tubman or Malcolm X? Is that even really my story to tell? And these are important questions for a melanin challenged person like myself. What I think we've learned is we need to go back to our own cultures. We need to go interrogate whiteness. We need to have these really difficult conversations in our own culture and in our own spaces. And dude, there's nothing harder than talking about race with white cops. But I felt like as part of this project, that was really my mission, to go into these spaces that it would be super hard for a filmmaker of color to be in. But me as, kid who grew up around the Irish Catholic dudes, I was an altar boy. I played Little League with them. I know those guys, and in some ways I love them. And I feel what they go through. I know what their model of manhood and violence and how they were raised is. So I can get in there and have these super difficult conversations, kind of see that as my mission. Another thing that I thought about was, is this a celebrity story that I'm making money off? No, nobody knew about Shu'aib's story. Nobody had heard of Harvey Schlossberg, this incredible Jewish intellectual pacifist who went into the NYPD, a macho, authoritarian, militaristic society, and preached radical pacifism. When I heard about him, I was like, what? Like, I'm in. I want to learn about this guy. I want to do this research. And so it was a melting pot, a melange of cultures. I don't like that word, melting pot, usually, but it was like kind of a gumbo. It was spicy, and it was a lot of cultural conflict. And a lot of it dealt with the culture wars in America, which I've been studying and trying to speak to for decades now. My last film, Boogeyman, about culture war, about racism, about the politics of fear, about the other. This stuff was kind of, I felt, in a world that maybe I could contribute something. So I took that leap. And, I would say lastly, I've been studying white people for a long time. One of the things I see us do is we want to avoid those messy conversations about race. We want to slap that black square up on our Twitter and be like innocent, be pure. And we fall prey to this narrative around innocence and guilt about racism, that it's about people. It's about, oh, that person's bad. That's Bull Connor over there. But this person is, totally righteous. These are false narratives that actually prevent us from putting the blame on the racist structures that we were raised in and the racism that infects all of us through growing up in the society. So I didn't want to have these simplistic conversations. Part of our whole goal in talking to my crew of people at Third Settlements and me and Fab were to make a messy conversation, a nuanced conversation that would really challenge white people to be like, damn, what's going on here? Here, these cops might say something super racist, but they're also critiquing a system of power in other places. Like, it's a very uncomfortable film for white people to engage with. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today with people like you and Daniel Coles, who can help parse some of these issues for us,
Yeah. I mean, dude, personally, I would be scared to like make a film with cops. Just my experience, just who I am, and I'm I consider myself a sensitive, down to earth dude, but it would still strike a little bit of fear in me, and you mentioned like dominant narratives and that idea. And since we're having this conversation about narrative, I was just curious, when you were making this film, did the idea of like narrative shift, was it present for you? I mean, I think about your style of filmmaking, right? It's very provocative, right? It's sort of a film style that's meant to spark conversation, right? So I was curious, did narrative shift, or just even the idea of like changing assumptions around ideas or issues, was that present for you as you began this piece?
I come out of this social justice work, going back 3 decades now. I've worked with a lot of nonprofits, consulting and doing work for them, groups like City Year or the Posse Foundation or the Food Bank for New York City, doing awareness campaigns. I'm working with a group called College Track now. So I do a lot of advocacy work about shifting views and getting facts out there and challenging narratives. But in my feature doc work, I really don't want to do advocacy work. I want to do work that brings in multiple viewpoints, has a multilateralism. Now, that can sometimes be like a namby-pamby kind of both sides are right kind of thing that I really don't want to work like that. I want to do a much more confrontational thing, like you said, where I let people speak, I do a deep listening, and then I put their narratives up against each other. And I don't comment a lot. And that's why someone like Daniel Coles is going to come on and he's going to take these teachable moments out of this film. Because when I talk to a guy like him, I'm like, yes, that's why I made this, to spark these conversations. But it needs a certain skillfulness, right? But if you dig into some of these moments, even in the trailer you just saw, where we saw the 4 pictures of Shu'aib Raheem and his friends, almost like mugshots. And the narrator referred to them as terrorists. And then very intentionally, I put Shu'aib on there going, no, they didn't know who we were. They jumped to conclusions. So I'm doing these narrative shifts all the way through it. And, hopefully that adds to this challenging of the narrative around policing, around who these guys were, why they were in there, what they were doing, and ultimately, did they even do the crime that they've been pilloried for in the media?
Yeah, I mean, it's so refreshing to hear that, you're consciously, in the process thinking about this as you're making the film. It's really interesting to hear. So good news. 60% of the folks who are here today have seen the film. Okay, that's good news. And the other 40%, guess what they said, Stefan? The other 40% said they're going to watch the film after this conversation, right? Because the portal is open till midnight tonight Eastern time, so please check it out. Tonight's going to be your last chance to do that.
Actually,
But,
we can let it go a couple more days. I just found out. So we can
okay.
let it go through Friday if people need a little more time. And if they want to share it with friends in the movement to get some of this out here, we made this film to spark these discussions. If you want to share it, if you're on this call and you want someone else to see it, maybe even host a screening, go to our website. We will give you this film to go do the work that you do in raising consciousness.
Beautiful, Stefan, beautiful. I think it's time to open up our fishbowl a little bit. I mean, I think there's more space in this fishbowl for people. So let's bring in Daniel. Let's bring in Daniel.
All right. As I am with two beautiful people talking about a film that sort of moved me in all kinds of ways. Yes, I'm Daniel Coles. I'm with the Morningside Center for Teaching Social Responsibility. I am a former New York City public school teacher, as well as an actor. And, I left teaching and came into Morningside Center on one level a bit wounded, I would say, because of the institutional violence of the DOE, and not sort of singling it out, but as a institution within our culture, right? All of these institutions are enacting different forms of violence. And so coming into Morningside, which actually started came out of the anti-war protests in the 80s with the nuclear arms buildup that was happening with the US and Soviet Union. There was a group of educators for social responsibility is what the group actually named themselves, because they wanted to intentionally teach children the kinds of skills that you would need to actually de-escalate conflict, resolve conflict creatively, but also teach children that they are that they have the capacity to create change, right, in society. So I'm very proud and happy to be a part of that organization. I did come into it at a time when I had experienced a tremendous loss in my life through violence. My nephew had been murdered, and buried him a couple of weeks before I started with the organization. And I can't think of a better organization to come into because of the processes that we use. It really aligns so much with this film. And I'm really, grateful that this film offers us an opportunity to talk about, how do you deal with violence and harm when harm is caused, and how do you not replicate, this type of violence. So we do that a lot, that work within schools. And so the other thing I guess I would say about the film and watching the film.
Yeah, I would love to hear. I mean, this is your first time seeing the film, right?
Yeah. I mean, I watched the film and then I watched it with, shout out to my wife who's in the audience and in the audience. We watched it together. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so many, I say like points of entry for me into that film, as a Black man, and looking at the four men who went into that, not even almost, young men, very young men who go into that store. So sort of relating to them, relating to the community and their response, relating to these ideas of manhood that are actually, promulgated throughout the film. And then having Harvey, who is, seen as a person who is countering those stereotypes around manhood, as well as Ben Ward, So lots of ways in which that film is resonating. And we actually try to, like I say, bring those ideas into the schools where we're teaching, because the schools are microcosm, right, of the larger society that we're in.
Your work is very much connected to, some of the work that we saw in this film around, healing trauma.
One moment that really had me thinking a lot about what we do and how do you interrupt narratives that, we've been born into. I had shared this quote about James Baldwin, right? And he was talking about the sort of social construction, of manhood. and a conversation with Nikki Giovanni. And he said, given the fact that the standards of civilization into which you were born are first outside of you, by the time you get to be a man, they are inside of you. And this is not susceptible to any kind of judgment, right? And so, I was thinking a lot about the moment in the film, two of the moments where I think Al Baker is talking about, he's just heard, Shu'aib talk about, his sort of transformation, or his, sort of coming to terms with the impact of all the actions that, spun out of the robbery, and really grappling with that, and coming to sort of understanding, realization, and harm that he caused, sort of walking through, right, all of these people, throughout his life, but also particularly at that moment. And then, Al's response is that, well, God can forgive him. But, I can't, I think that he should have been tried and, put to death. And I was thinking a lot about like how he could hear this sort of testimony, right? This sort of, story, this human story, about to really sort of, really try an accountability, really being accountable, right, for this harm. To the best that you can do while being locked up, right? Because we have a whole other process that we use where you actually are face to face with people, right, that you've harmed. But he's doing that, and yet, Al cannot release himself, right? He's trapped in this pain. He's trapped in this grief. He's trapped in this loss, as was the partner, of the officer who was killed, and they have no way of processing, right, that sort of metabolizing that injury and that hurt. And the idea is like, how do we create communities of care? How do we hold space, where people can process that? Why, how do we teach, even from an early age? It's why, like, the idea is that as human beings, right, that to be human is to suffer, right? Then how are we teaching, and learning, like what do I do with my suffering? How collect, not just individually, but, collectively, right? Community, how do we handle suffering? How do we handle grief? How do we handle loss? And in a society, we have, lost many of the practices that we've had that actually, gave people, care and support and understanding in terms of those feelings. So that was one thing. And I think, as I'm mentioning, Shu'aib's journey, right, when he talks about, what he has to reckon with, that so connects with, I think, like, mindset shift, right? How do we get people to understand that, putting someone behind bars for 37 years, or putting Dawood behind bars for 46 years, right? It really does nothing, when I say does nothing, to address the pain that I think it's Alice Buckner, the daughter, I think is her name, Alice, the first name.
Alice, yeah, and her mom, Fonnie.
Yeah, and her mom, right? They get no kind of attention, care, support, restoration, repair. Like, how do you? So those are the questions, right, that we ask and we try to deal with in our work. But as I was sort of watching that and experiencing that story, wondering, like, how do we shift this understanding, right, that there are other ways, right, of addressing, right, those kinds of harms, where people can begin to heal and begin to feel more whole, that you actually are seen, that you actually are heard. And there's a collective, response to that we have a collective responsibility, to care for each other, when these kinds of things, happen. Oh, you on mute.
I'm on mute, yeah. That reminds me of like something Harvey says in the film, right? He says, all the pressures, all the same anxieties that affect criminal also affect cop, right? We have to reduce the anxiety to get them out of a state, get them out of the panic state, right? And he talks a lot about, he talks about dynamic inactivity, let the emotions wind down, right? And I just find that so fascinating, about like being able to like see both perspectives of, and this is something that, Stefan, you intentionally are working to creating that dynamic, understanding of both perspectives, right? I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit.
Oh yeah, man, for sure. And I mean, the most amazing thing about Daniel Coles is like the first thing he ever said about the movie was, we were talking the other day, it's like, wow, Al Baker's in a lot of pain, huh? And as a man of color, to even see that about this cop who's expressing hostility and this sense of a very punitive, vengeance-based justice against people of color, I was like, that's the first person who's ever even said that or seen that about Al Baker. And it was amazing to me. Obviously, it's because of the work he does, but it's so easy for us as a society, like I was saying before, to just point the finger at bad people, like, you're racist, it's you. That lets the system off the hook. It lets the way we're socialized off the hook. We are victims of the man code. Okay, we're taught we need to win interactions. We need to dominate. We can never show vulnerability. We need to be fluent in the language of violence, of inflicting harm and accepting it. What do we say when we praise a football player? Yeah, that guy can really take a beating. It's these narratives around violence where we've been socialized into it, that Daniel can look at Al and say that he's actually suffering. And people are looking now at these deaths of despair and white people feeling no meaning in their life. And you can have all the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers you want. That's really not going to make you any happier. And I think people are doing really good work now around realizing like this racism that we see all around the country, it isn't helping anyone. It's just letting the system off the hook for the travails and the sufferings of the white working class. And for 400 years, all the alliances that we've needed to make between white working people and people of color that would actually change America, that has been the fear of the powers that be. So I don't just want to point the finger and say, oh, these cops are bad. I want to go, why are they unable to see the humanity of a person of color? Why are they able to intervene and save a white guy when he's carrying a machine gun and the white guy gets out alive? How do we shift their narrative and really look down deep into the pain and the grief that they clearly talk about in this film? Al Shepard says, first you grieve, then you want to go kick somebody's ass, make somebody pay. So they're putting this unacknowledged and unaddressed grief directly back into violence. And if we can see that, and if we can humanize them, then we can start to deal with the root of the problem and how we do policing as a society today. And the crimes that aren't being done by them, for them, but as a white person, those crimes are being done in my name. So I need to get in there and start to figure out why.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. And I want to expand the fishbowl magically through Zoom to include Shu'aib Raheem. Brother, it's a pleasure to have you here and an honor.
I just want to thank everyone. This film has really changed my life in a lot of ways. It's, while it's illustrative to you who've watched it, it was very, I didn't get to see the whole thing till it was done. Mm-hmm. Not even clips. Stefan kept it away from me, even though he would talk about some things, but he never really let me see it until it was just about ready to be released. And it blew me away. First time I seen the other people who had been impacted and heard their voices, seen their faces, mm-hmm. Really understood their pain.
Yeah.
That day was the worst day of my life. I made the worst decision in my life. It is in those states of trauma that I've come to learn over the years as a result of this and during my incarceration, that when you're in a state of fear and trepidation, it is where you're most vulnerable and more likely to make the wrong decision, you know, for all the right reasons. And, you know, wanting to defend myself and my family and my community from an imminent danger and threat, unable to see any other solution. I followed that path of toxic masculinity that Stefan referenced and as much has been said about it in the beginning. And unfortunately, that is a path that way too many people take. I was very, very pleased and satisfied with the final result of the film, and that, you know, it can serve as an instrument and a teaching a tool for those who are in trauma, and they can see what could happen, what could go wrong, you know, and the tragic effects that an impact it will have on those who really didn't do you any harm. And so I'm grateful that that came out clearly. Was I affected by what I heard? Absolutely. Did I empathize with Al Baker? Absolutely. Just like you, I could see he was conflicted. You know, his humanity showed through in amazing ways, even though he made some less than humane statements early on. But that goes to show the complexity of a human being, the forces that are pulling on him. You know, I was shocked to hear him even show any degree of empathy towards me and the things that I was doing inside before I came home, and of course, since I've been home. And so, yes, all of that moved me. To hearing what happened to Bonnie Buckner, oh my God, that just, you know, even now, even just think about it, I get chills because, you know, I came to know her even though she was terrified of me and my presence. But I understood that she was very much afraid, and I, you know, really tried to help her the best I could under the circumstances. But to know that she never really recovered, that she was even pregnant at the time, she had a miscarriage. Oh man, that wiped me out.
Yeah, that moment in the film was like, it was just so like profound to see you react to that moment. It seemed like that was the first time that you learned that. You know, I don't know if that was true or not, but it felt like it was the first time that you learned that. And you know, someone in the chat, you know, Amir says, my inquiry, you know, man, homo lupus, a wolf, a predator, you know, how do we change its nature? All right. And I think about you, Shu'aib, and as someone who has lived through as much as you have, you know, what can you share about changing that nature?
Everything begins with education and knowledge. During my time in prison, I was reflecting on myself, you know, analyzing myself, you know, reflecting on my past, all the things that had happened to me when I was a child, things beyond my control, the pathway that I took, you know, not just in this incident, but other things, relationships, even being not showing up in a positive or supportive way. I began to understand why it happened. But I was in prison surrounded by men drowning in testosterone all around me. There was very little estrogen in the atmosphere. And so you got this machismo, you know, cultural, you know, mores all around me. But I was in a position of leadership. I was in the position of authority. I'd been elected as the spiritual leader, the imam of a Muslim community in a very, very dangerous place where life and death can hinge on a look, a misspoken word, an accidental bump or nudge in the hallway, or just simply because somebody just don't like you, you know? And I've seen men kill other men in those environments. I've seen acts of violence, man, that would chill anyone's blood here and give you chills down your spine. If I was to describe it, and I won't, I'll spare you that. And so in that environment, you know, trying to hold on to my humanity, I was Really, some people think it was unfortunate, but I ended up in segregation for various periods of time. And the most peaceful time I had in it was when I was in the box in segregation. I was by myself. I was able to think, I was able to study, I was able to meditate, fast, and work out, and and write letters, and really not worry about someone running up on me in the middle of the night because I was in there by myself. And during those reflective moments is when I had my spiritual awakening. And so, to keep my men around me alive, we had to begin to talk and communicate. Education is the beginning. Education is the root. Get them to understand what has happened to them, how it has affected them. Why our masculinity is the way it is. Why we think that being a man means that you got to be the toughest, the roughest, the most dangerous. Why do we think like that? And we question those things. So it took me a while to, again, my own self-reflection, and then to model it to others around me. And again, it wasn't a conscious mind. I'm just being myself. I'm not trying to be the tough guy, the rough guy, top of the heap, And I found out that over the years, I had a great number of people that I had influenced who were outside of the community. People would come to me, want to walk the yards with me, just want to unload on me about trauma, wanted my advice about things, spiritual advice. Christians, Jews, I mean, everybody around me, even the LGBTQ community, the gay men that were inside, I intervened. I said, leave him alone, man. What are you talking about? You want to kill him? Why? Because he's gay? It's none of your business. Leave him alone. It's none of your problem. And, because they were being brutalized. I don't like bullies. I never liked bullies in my life. I'm the oldest of 8 children in my family. So I have spent most of my life protecting my younger brothers and sisters. And one of my brothers is gay. I don't like the way he was being treated. I don't like nobody calling him the F word. He come home with black eyes. I go out and fight people, man, twice myself. I got beat up too. I lost quite a few fights. I remember every one of them that I lost.
I wanted to, toss it back to Stefan a little bit and talk about just kind of understanding, the notion of how language impacts people, how language carries these narratives that we're talking about, right? And how it impacts people too. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, they say things like, yeah, the commissioner had no balls, he was a panty waist. One of the cops describes Harvey as fruity, which is a code word for being gay. So you see that just by being a man who didn't engage in violence and had a whole different framework, he was otherized. He was demasculinized. And, that's just a lot of the work that people are doing now, and that we really hope they can use this film in their work. If you really look at some of the stuff that Daniel was saying as well, I mean, he sees through this phony narrative of masculinity and punitive violence. We've often spoke about how Fani was so ill-served by our punitive criminal justice system. What people don't always see is how cops are ill-served by that, and how the Gilroy family was ill-served. I mean, that family was really hit hard by grief. It manifested in a lot of negative ways. And they were told a lot of things about these 4 men, about Brother Raheem, that he would come and kill them if he got out of prison. The Patrolmen's Benevolent Union controls the whole narrative around the parole system. And so even people like Jerry Riccio, the store owner, when I finally interviewed him, I was shocked that he really didn't bear any ill will towards Shu'aib, because everything I saw in the press was about, how he told them to bathe because they were going to Allah. And I asked him about that, and he was like, well, I don't know if he meant that he was going to kill us or that the cops were going to kill us. I don't know. I was like, what? Because in the New York Post, that was considered a death threat. It was like this Bismillah kind of thing that they're about to be executed. And it was just total yellow journalism. But it was so fascinating to me that when you really dig into some of these stories, you learn how we think that punitive justice has all this rigor. People did a crime, they got to do the time. And then you learn, actually, no, a lot of people who have harmed others think it's easier to go to prison than go through a restorative justice process where they have to sit down, face people, hear their grief, deal with their emotions that as men we hide away. It's like, ooh, they don't want to do that. And it's amazing too that in the film you even hear someone like Al Baker, who is so foundationally part of this, traditional system of justice and policing, say, hey man, it's a different kind of strength. The strength to resist violence, to not get sucked into that. I think we can really redefine manhood in that way. And I'm interested in what Daniel would say about that, because I know that's the hard work. He's one of the people out there doing every day.
Well, one of the things that came up for me when I first saw the film, and the ways in which, both a lot of the men on the in the film were talking about processing their emotions, right, or not processing their emotions. And I said before that the fact that no one asked Brian, I think, about how he was doing is not a surprise to me, because I don't think, they have no capacity themselves, right, to help. Right, because I said how many situations I've been in myself where I feel like men have they struggle with feelings, and connecting to their feelings, particularly if it's something emotional, and it turns into all of these self-harming things, or self-harming behaviors. Something I know I've experienced in my own life, because again, it's not being allowed to actually feel the feelings that you feel, like the sadness, the loss, the grief, right? The fear, you talk about the fear, I think, in the film that you feel. But when you have programs that intentionally teach skills to children to understand what they're feeling, to name what they're feeling, to, where they get validation and affirmation around what they're feeling and their right to feel those things without judgment and othering, then you have a whole different way of interacting and relating, to yourself and to other people, right? That doesn't come out oftentimes in these forms of violence.
It's a really interesting question too. Amir's whole point that, is man the wolf and innately aggressive? And I have to push back against that, because I don't believe that for a minute. I think it's this false Hobbesianism that's been put forth in our society that's really a function of capitalism in many ways. We're taught to be in competition with each other. There are plenty of societies that handle things very differently, and in which men were seen very differently as well. And I once asked Noam Chomsky about this. We were doing an interview. I was like, Noam, are we violent? Is it the system? Is it innate? And he told this little story about they had a boxing class in his school when he was a kid. And he said him and his friends were like these little peaceniks, but they put him in a ring and they put boxing gloves on these little boys. And he said, we tried to beat the crap out of each other. We went nuts because it was the setting that they were placed in, and that what the rules they were taught. And that was really amazing to me to hear. I've never forgotten that story, because I don't believe we're innately evil. And I know a lot of caring, emotionally, really intelligent men who have networks of support. Sometimes they're actually men of color more than white guys. It seems to have that sensitivity that I think we all need as a society, which is surprising, because that's not the narrative that, again, we're told in the media.
Yeah.
And we talked about that so much while making this film. This binary good and evil narrative that you hear throughout the film, actually, cops saying the bad guys. They love to say that term, the bad guys, So I love that Tej put that in there. We really were trying to question that and make the conversation a little messier, because, is someone evil? Are we the worst thing we've ever done? Or can we afford each other a little wiggle room here? Because that's where all the interesting conversations happen.
I'm really grateful for this sort of words of gratitude that the Onondaga people sort of created for their community, where every day before this gathering, these are the words that come before all else. And the first part of it really talks about or speaks to the idea that as a people, right? And as you look at the gathering and you recognize that the cycle of life continues from all the different, from the youngest to the oldest. But the first part of that is that, you know, we are basically instructed to live in balance and harmony with each other and all other relations. And I just think about like that practice, like you start your gatherings with that practice and that idea, that view, you know, and so it flies to me. It flies against this idea that somehow our nature is to be predatory in some way, and that through this practice, right, you're shifting the narrative. You know, your narrative is something very different, right, about how we are to be in relationship to each other and the rest of the world.
I was part of a group inside of Shawangunk, which is the New York State maxi prison, where all of the so-called gang leaders and mob guys, real guys, you know, made guys, everybody is put in this one prison, which is a maxi environment. All of the men that I was dealing with over the years, you know, of course, from a spiritual perspective, having to do with sin, having to do with shame, you know, these are things that I was very familiar with in my own self, for that matter, you know, but I was also a spiritual guide and advisor to men in the community and men outside of the community. So when we started this restorative justice group and started talking about ways of creating peace and restoring peace in the community, but more importantly, ways in which we as men, we have all, because Shawangunk is a maxi, so 99.9% of the men who were there were all there for very violent crimes. They were considered the most dangerous in the state of New York and had been labeled as such. And I was surprised the number of men that signed up to the group. And it became a support group. We started out, the initial name of the group was the Victim Offender Mediation Program. I was the founder and co-chair of the group. And I was being inspired to do so by correspondence I was having with the University of Minnesota, which at the time was very much in the forefront in the field of restorative justice. And so they sent me a lot of material. Mm-hmm. Another story that moved me was the story of the reconciliation, or at least the meeting between Yusuf Hawkins' father with one of the young men who had killed his son. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, I've seen the documentary about it and the movie about it, but they don't mention that part because this happened after the young man came home. And I knew him. We were in the same prison together. And he was also one of the men who was in my group and wanted to get in the group, had a waiting list. My group became so big and these were the men that came and talked openly about the things that they did and what they would like to say and what would they say to the family? They wanted to say something. They wanted to make amends. Mm-hmm. And so that was the only program that gave them that outlet. And when we started writing letters to the Department of Corrections in Albany, wanting to open up the window for dialogue, because the victims' organizations said that they wanted to come in to meet with us. New York State shut it down. They said, no, we're not going to open that door. During the rescission hearing process, you got a chance to see the evidence of why they want to keep you retained inside. And I read for the first time victim impact statements from the family of the officer. Oh my God. Here I am, the chairman of the Restorative Justice Committee, and I'm reading something and I'm preparing men to deal with the families, even writing draft letters myself. And I was completely floored and left speechless by what I read. It really touched me and moved me. I canceled the group for about a month. Not just the group. I tried to stay in my cell. I'm a paralegal. I was in the law library every day, you know, so I couldn't even, I had to give a couple of my cases away to someone else I couldn't function after reading these letters. They were so powerful and so heart-wrenching. And what moved me the most was the realization that here it was, over 35 years after this incident, that these people were in so much pain. Their trauma had not been addressed. So the same reaction that you saw when I heard about Fanny Buckner is similar to, but much more powerful at that time, reading those letters. I could hardly speak. I couldn't stop crying for weeks. I prayed 5 times a day, every day, as part of my faith. And my prayers were longer and deeper and more personal than ever, because I just did not see how or what to say. But I knew these people, I was feeling them and the pain of what they were feeling 35 years later over the loss of their loved one, over actions that I'm responsible for. And so that weight upon me, really almost shut me down. And I say shut me down. I came close to a nervous breakdown because I could hardly function. I couldn't go to work. I had to send the officer who ran the law library. He came to my son and said, "You all right?" I said, "No." But I couldn't tell him why, because I couldn't share these documents. And I had to prepare for this hearing that was coming up, which we postponed, really because I had no idea the harm that I had caused, the depth of it. And neither did any other men and women who are incarcerated. They never really heard these voices. There's no conversation. Crime is a personal act against another person. Violence affects a human being and those connected to that human being. Restorative justice has as its root the stakeholders, which is the harm party, the person who caused the harm, and the community from which it took place. It's a three-legged stool. But here we have a system that didn't allow this process of healing to really take place. Healing can only take place with a conversation. It's Harvey Schwartzberg said, everything can be resolved with a conversation. But if there's no conversation, people get locked into these corners, locked into their emotions, and some people never really recover. And so I eventually snapped out of it. The guy would come to me and said, "Yo, man, we need the group, man. What's the matter with you, man? We need you. Wake up." Putting pressure on me to come out of myself. And so I had to fight through my own emotions. And day by day, I got a little stronger, but more determined than ever, man, to find a way to make this happen. I wrote more letters to Albany. And then when they finally decided to stick with the decision to let me come home, that was an inspiration for all of the men that I left behind, because they knew me. They knew who I was as a person. They knew about these very deep, personal, and confidential conversations we had in the group and the ones I had with men individually, things that I have to carry with me to my grave, about the things that they've done and why they did it or how they did it. And their details, I don't want to, I can never share them, because that's part of being a spiritual leader. You have to carry these stories with you, but nonetheless, I know there are a lot of men inside that want to make amends. And to my surprise, a lot of them are home now. And they're reaching out to me, and we are building a community out here. And all of them are working in these fields around restorative justice, like I am. All of them are working in the fields as interrupters in the community, utilizing the C.U.R.E model, violence interrupters. So they're doing this work all because we came to the point where we began to talk about what we were feeling.
A couple of the chats, I just wanted to bring them up. Lena Hayes says, "More than a mistake, Brother Raheem, you are healing, redemptive, and love. Thank you." So I just wanted to hold that up and speak that Brian Stevens, each one of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. And Mr. Raheem shows that each of us is actually even much more than any action, and we need each other to realize that. Thank you. Davian, grateful for this dialogue. Thank you, Davian. Her heart is full and tender. Beautiful. Someone privately chatted me. I won't reveal their name, but they wanted me to share this with the fishbowl. They said, my direct work is not in this domain, and I cannot see today where this experience will affect my life. But I know fully that I have been deeply impacted. I am changed because of this conversation. Thank you. So I will give each of you amazing fellas a quick minute to close this out. We're a little over our time, but it's all good, So let's start with Daniel. Daniel, you're
I am just so grateful for being here and being a part of this conversation. For each of you, I feel like I'm changed. I'm changed because of the film. I'm changed because of meeting you, Brother Shu'aib. And it's great for you, Manny, for bringing us together and supporting this work in this way. And that idea of really, how do we use these narratives to support what we're doing, out here, and the change we want to see, the shifts we want to make. And I just want to point up that idea of, one, it's about us keeping each other safe. This idea of policing and, relying on the police to provide safety. There's a difference between safety and security. And we see that in the school systems now, right? The idea is bringing in more safety agents, and we want to shift this idea that we're actually, it is the community and the school that is what will keep or ensure safety in a sense. So that's one thing I really want to, just to stress. I really appreciate you talking about the idea of those who we were centering the people who've been harmed. It's so important, and our system does not do that. It's the rule that's broken, and then the punishment that's meted out. But the people who are harmed are left, with the grief and the loss and the confusion and the questions. That is something that, we really need to understand and work for their healing. So thank you.
I'm really inspired by Shu'aib's journey. And he talks in the film about walking back through your decisions, even the tough things, even your mistakes, that reckoning with things you did that you're not proud of. And as a man, we're socialized into violence. That path that he walks, I didn't realize for a long time while I was making this film, that path is actually what white America needs to do with our own history of violence. We need to look back at where we've been as a country clearly. We're not some easy little black square on the Twitter. We need to walk back through that pain and acknowledge it and recognize it before we can ever begin to heal it. And that's exciting work. I think we've seen countries like South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They've done it. There's no reason why we can't do it. That's the work that we're called to be a part of here. And it's interesting when we see someone who's been demonized so much in our society and called a cop killer, and put in the media as this person who shouldn't even have a voice. Now we see, actually, wait, Brother Raheem is treading a path that the rest of our society can actually learn from. I really love that, because we talk about shifting narratives. That flips a narrative on its head. And as we get out there and do that work, I hope we can all be part of realizing that this restorative justice thing holds the key to America, into our future. and the fear that's guiding us right now, the sense that violence is looming in our future after January 6th, and that we can't escape it because people feel unheard and they feel that they're in danger in their white values or being challenged, and they're going back to this reflexive gun culture and this American manhood and John Wayne-esque violence that we talk about in the movie that's been dogging us for 400 years. I feel very privileged to be part of being able to change that narrative, which we need to do right now more than ever. So thank you to everyone for being part of this.
Thank you. Brother Raheem, you close us out.
Yes, I just wanted to share some of the work that I'm doing now since I've been home. I'm a trauma support manager. I work with all of my clients are survivors of violent crimes. We work with an organization called Common Justice, where the focus is around restorative justice, which is the spirit of our organization. So I work with the harmed parties. We've actually have done circles around some of the most violent crimes, from assault all the way up to attempt murder, which is where I really think the real hard work of restorative justice needs to be done in those fields. Not that it doesn't apply in other areas, but I'm working with that group. And I've also had the privilege of also doing groups in schools. And I just did one last night, virtually, with a group of girls, 9 young girls, 16 to 18 years old. Very interesting. It was a trauma education. And wow, I've done groups with young boys too, young men. But this group with the young girls really opened my eyes. I've done several with them. This is the third group. They asked me to come back. Why? I don't know. Well, I do know now, because they told me they don't have fathers at home, and so they look up to me, and I'm able to talk to them and relate to some of the things and the trauma that they've gone through in their lives. And so it's been very inspiring. Last night was the first of a series of 6 groups that we've been running. And so I'm still doing this work, and I'm working with a younger population. I'm working with people who have never actually committed a violent crime, but are living in trauma. Our communities of color are war zones. And these young children are walking around with PTSD. They hear gunshots. They have to step over chalk lines of bodies in the street. They've seen death all around them, close and far away. It's in the music. It's everywhere. And these young people, man, are traumatized. But to be able to engage them in conversation, get them to start talking about it now, will prevent the likelihood that they would take a violent act going forward. So the work continues. La lucha continua. The struggle continues.
Thank you.
And I want to shout out Amir Sultani. I see your name. I know you're one of the consultants. I never met you yet. But I'm looking forward to being this. Okay, God willing. Thank you. And thank you for everyone else for listening.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you all 3 of you and everyone that's part of this conversation. I really appreciate having this space with you. I just want to do a quick reminder: holdyourfirefilm.com. Go there. You'll be able to sign up for be able to hold your own community screening, engage with Stefan and his team. I also want to thank everyone for coming, and everyone here. We invite you for the next in this 2-part series. We're going to be talking with Kevin Shaw, the director of a film called Let the Little Light Shine, which is a story of an organizing victory for public schools in Chicago, which is a beautiful story. So I look forward to seeing you guys on the 25th. We'll be, getting in that on social. But if you enjoyed this one, come back for that one. We're going to continue having these conversations about shifting the narrative. And I just wanted to thank you all for coming here tonight. And, I really thought this was beautiful.
I'm going to be bold and say, I have nothing to say, but I never want to leave what I just experienced. So that's why I'm still here. I don't have anything to say. I just really appreciate what you gave us. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's why I'm having trouble ending the Zoom.
I'm going to say thank you and I'm going to step away. But this is powerful. Thank you, Brother Raheem. God bless you.
Ditto. Good night.
All the beauty to you. All the love to you.
Brother Raheem, I love hearing about what the people are doing that are now on the outside. You never mentioned that. And I mean, I know some people at Osborne and stuff, what they're doing, but that was so cool to hear about.
Well, interesting that you say that, because there's one of my real dear friends who was inside with me, and we were very close. The mayor, Eric Adams, just appointed him as the gun violence czar in the city of New York, A.T. Mitchell. He is the CEO of an organization in East New York called Man Up. And that's one of the organizations that I've worked very closely with. He and I are very close friends. So here he is at the top of the heap in the city, as because he's at the top of all of the organizations that work with the C.U.R.E violence model here in the city of New York. And he's a violence interrupter. And these are the ones that respond to the gunshots that are happening in the communities. And all of the credible messengers, which is what a name that was given to us by a dear friend of mine, but the credible messengers are those who have come from these communities, have been incarcerated, and have come home and are giving back. So we are the ones that are actually out there doing the work, working with these young people, these young gangs, trying to interrupt, because violence is now, as it should have always been, looked at as a disease. And just like, and it's treated that way. The C.U.R.E model is looking at violence the same way as you do a disease. If there is an epidemic, then you try to interrupt that cycle of transmission. And the cycle of transmission, of course, is the revenge cycle, the violence cycle. And so we have these men and women who are also out in the streets in our communities. These are the people doing the work. A.T. Mitchell in the city of New York is the most well-known, most outspoken, a real good, humble, and champion for all of us. And Mayor Eric Adams has appointed him. And you see him in all the news shots. He's there all the time. And he's also someone who has overcome his own, not overcome it, but he's working through his trauma by trying to break the cycle of violence in the community. Trauma informs violence.
Yeah.
Hurt people hurt people.